Let's begin. Welcome to Edge Group Podcast, episode number what is it, Nabil?
7.
7. Wow, we're almost at 10. And we have a really special guest today. Usually we have racers, and today we have someone that not only is a racer, but is also an instructor and a motor journalist. And if you ever picked up a magazine, a Sport Rider magazine, or any of the magazines, you probably read what he wrote. If you ever did any track day, you probably encounter one of his instructors or even him. We have the world famous Nick Ienatsch.
Good to join you guys. I appreciate y'all doing this. It's a lot of fun to talk about riding techniques for me, and I think we got a lot of good messages out there.
Good, and it's great to have you, and thank you for agreeing to be in our little podcast. So for people that don't know you, let me just start with your bio. You are era number 1 plate holder at Willow Springs Raceway, 1989, 1990. And I think we all have a soft spot for Willow Springs, especially turn 9.
Painful memories.
Yeah. We were a Grand Nationals final champion in 3 classes in 89. AMA 250 GP number 2 and number 3 plate holder in 1991, 1993, 1994, and 1995. AMA Super Teams number 1 plate with Two Brothers Racing, 1993, Arion Racing 1994, number 2 plate with Dutchman Racing 1995. AMA Drag Bike Pro Street World Finals winner at Valdosta, Georgia, 2008. How do you switch to drag racing?
Well, that was a fun one. There's a guy named Kent Stotts, and he and his son Frankie are world-renowned racing a CBR 1000 drag racing, and it's a class that no wheelie bar, extended swing arm, turbocharge, and we run 7.0s at 199, 200, probably faster now. But Kent and I were friends from some magazine stories that we used to do called Superbikes from Hell. Were you guys around during Superbikes from Hell and UFO and Limited Flying Objects? We basically invited tuners to build the wildest street bikes they could build, had to be street legal, and went over 200 miles an hour all the time. So Kent was one of those guys, along with a guy named Bill Hahn. And when Kent started drag racing with his son, he called me and said, "Come ride this thing as a journalist." And the first time I showed up, I think in 07, I got in the semifinals, and I got beat in the semifinals. And so he invited me back in 09, and I won it at the World Finals. And it was such a big deal because here's a road racer, some old road racer comes out of nowhere and beats those guys. And it was pretty fascinating and pretty interesting, and one of those situations where I'm with the best in the world and I just did what he told me to do, and what do you know, it worked. So that's how that happened. So now I'm a drag racer all of a sudden. But now that I say that, I did all the drag racing testing at the magazines for all those years too. So I was very comfortable with drag strip. I love drag strip. I go to one on my own stuff. So that was a really neat deal, though. A lot of fun.
Very nice. Also AMA 600 Super Sport podium finisher, ARMA winner on TZ 750, NSR 250, GPZ 550, KZ 1000. I think I read that article of you talking about racing at 60, and I think it was with the GPZ.
Right. And see, that's where I know Kerry Andrew, and I'm really glad you did a podcast with him. He's quite an amazing person, and the Z1 that he races now was sold to a collector back in the day after he was done racing it in AMA Superbike, and he and I have been friends for a long time. He did all the magazine teardowns for me at Sport Rider, and he'd always show up. He's just a great guy. And so I called him up a few years ago and I said, "Kerry, we need to go racing ARMA. is what we need to do. We're a little bit older now. We should go racing ARMA." And he's like, "Huh." We talked about it, and next thing you know, he has contacted the collector of his Z1, and he repurchased it and redid it. And now we go racing Arma together and have a great time. And we only race once or twice a year, but it's really fun. And the GPZ that I race is a little 550 that was owned by my friend, now passed. And you know, his wife has allowed me to race it. So it's quite a neat deal for me to be able to race that GPZ. And of course, Kerry's gone through it. And as you know, Gal, Kerry does some things to motors that he has sworn me to secrecy about. So there's things that Kerry Andrew does that put his stuff ahead of everybody else. And I cannot write about it. I can't say it, but that GPZ is a good runner.
So I'll end and say that I don't know what you're talking about.
Good.
The first time that I got to know what Kerry can do to an engine is when I had my Gixxer K6 and the clutch was hopping because it was a slipper clutch and I couldn't really get a clean start, and I brought it to him and he drilled a few holes in there and it was fine. That was before he built it, and I remember that KZ1000, it was just a chassis, and he told me, hey, I just bought my old bike back, and the carburetors were I think like $4,000. He got them in Japan, and it's an entire story. He's got like a super secret carbon fiber tank in there, and I don't want to talk I don't want to talk about it because you remember what happened a few weeks ago with the disqualification and complaint that was launched against him. So let's not get into it too much. You're also FIM certified, runs over 200 miles per hour, and you traveled at a speed of 234 miles per hour.
Where'd you find that bio? That's all my that's all my racing stuff.
Did you see the curvature of the earth traveling in that speed?
You know, you don't see a whole lot at that speed. We were at the Honda Proving Center, and that's up in north of Willow Springs, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And there's a 7-mile oval, so there's a 7-mile oval with 2.5-mile corners and 1-mile straights. And so we would launch here in, say, turn 2 if it was a dirt track. We'd launch in turn 2. We'd have all our trucks and buses there at turn 2. We'd run down the straightaway into the curve and go through the curve, turns 3 and 4 of a dirt track at 185 miles an hour. And it was kind of crazy. And then we'd come off the turn in, say, 4th gear, because those were 5 speeds back then, most of them. Come off the gear in 4th gear and accelerate. And the thing, this is 1996 through 99-ish. And we were on tires that weren't rated for those speeds. No one had gone that fast, certainly on street legal motorcycles. And so we'd come off the corner and you could not bail out. You couldn't say, oh, this is not going well, I'm going to stop. There's, so once you were in it, you were in it. And we'd come off the corner and go to full power. Almost everything was turbocharged or supercharged, some nitrous, but not too many, and some normally aspirated, but almost everything was turbocharged. And the thing would start to wobble, start to longitudinally weave. And so you'd scoot back and try to calm the airflow. If that was worse, you'd scoot forward and calm the airflow. And by the time you did a couple of those moves, you were through the timing lights. It was that fast. The things were that fast. And it was one of those things where each bike you rode was kind of special, very special. And like the tuner would say, okay, Nick, shift it at this RPM. Don't touch that button. Make sure you click this switch when you're in 4th gear, but not in 3rd gear. It's one of those deals where you're mentally overwhelmed, and then the speed was crazy. I can remember coming off the corner and it's wobbling, and I'm not wobbling, it's weaving, and I'm moving around, I'm checking, I'm looking at the tachometer, I'm shifting at the right moment, but not with the clutch on this one, and this one shifts this way. And I'd look one more time, check coolant temperature, I'd change my tuck, and I'd be through the lights. And it was crazy days. And that's really one of the things that Kerry participated in, along with Kent Stotts, who I just mentioned. So a lot of big time, Tom Houseworth, a lot of big time tuners were there trying to go 200 miles an hour. And that came because back in the day, the mid 90s, some of the manufacturers were saying, yeah, this bike goes 200. And so we started to call their bluff, and we'd go up to, our high desert proving center to run top speed with a radar gun, and nothing was going 200. Yoshimura would show up with with Big Papa, it went 185. And these guys, Vance and Hines would show up with everything at 176, big numbers, but nothing at 200. And so we were like, huh. Then this little guy named Terry Kaiser shows up, multi-time drag racing national champion legend. And Terry Kaiser shows up with a ZX11 turbo. And we go 215 on it on our high desert proving facility, which was a straight road in the high desert. We went 215 on that bike. And that's what started everything. UFO, Superbike from Hell. All of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, we can do this. So let's see how much we can do. And that's what launched that high speed stuff.
I remember reading about those things when I was a kid.
Well, I mean, to put things in perspective, right? Many years later, prototype bikes MotoGP, Jorge Martinez broke the speed record at 226 miles an hour. You guys were doing this a long time ago on production, modified but production bikes.
Yeah, and of course they do it lap after lap on normally aspirated bikes, which is obviously hugely impressive. And they sit up under the brakes too, which is kind of crazy. But we were running, flat out for about, I would say, 1.25 miles maybe. So we didn't have time to really cook things. But you're right, it was quite a time. And it's funny how many people still comment to me, especially people my age, will still say, man, those were the coolest days when you guys were doing that, because we rarely took a bike home that was running. Every tuner there showed up because the top speed was the last thing. We would do a street ride, drag strip, a road race lapping, and then top speed. But the top speed was the real thing for most people. And so every tuner there would continue to add boost, add nitrous, lean the bike out, change gearing to try to go faster. And I don't think we ever took a running bike home. Very rarely we took a running bike home because everybody just kept tweaking it. So we burnt one bike to the ground. My friend Lance Holst rode through the traps on Tom Hauser's bike. It popped, backfired to the carburetors, caught the thing on fire, burned to the ground, blew shit up, went crazy. But the last year we did it, I don't remember the year. The last year we did it, the invitation to these 6 or 8 tuners that we invited every year, different people, the invitation said, don't show up if your shit won't go 200 miles an hour. That was the invitation, because that was the level we were. Everything was going 200. So 200 was the basement. And that was pretty great times.
That's amazing. There's something sexy about top speed, right? Even when I tell people who don't ride, they go, you race motorcycles? I go, yes. I say, how fast can you go?
Yeah, right. Right. Well, and it's so funny.
I have to explain that, there's no long straights and there are turns and it's lap time that matters. It does not even register. They're like, you go over 200. What's the fastest you've ever done?
That's what they want to hear.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't know any road racer that knows what mile an hour they are going at any point on the racetrack. None of us care. We say it's the top of 4th, the middle of 3rd. That's how we go about it. And it's fairly interesting. But the top speed stuff, once you get into it, and I'm not into it like I'm sure some of your readers and even maybe you guys, but once you go to the Maxton Mile and you start running some of these top speed events, Bonneville for sure, El Mirage, it becomes an incredible science. And it's fun to speak to some people that are really truly into it. And I've got some friends that really are, and it's fun to talk to them about the little things that we do on the bike to make it go better. And it becomes a science and much more than horsepower.
Yeah. I mean, case in point, this KTM, right? I've first time I get on it, it took me, I went from an R6 to an MV. It took me about, 10 track days to get back to the speed where I was on the R6.
Right.
And then I get the KTM and I beat my personal best the first day on it. Just because it's more nimble and it rides better and it's better set up. I mean, it was set up not for me, it was just set up stock.
Yeah.
And everything was still the way they built it, not one tweak. And you get the bike running correctly, it's not just engine for sure.
Yeah, we're in a golden age. We can buy these leader bikes and have them almost as light as 600s, same wheelbase, handling really wonderfully. If I have a friend of mine who rides well, is an expert level rider, and they say I'm looking for a new 600, I will tell them, before you buy that, ride one of the new leader bikes, ride an RSV4, the KTM, ride the R1, ride those big bikes, because in the old days they were pretty heavy, hard to manage, no TC. But nowadays they are really beautiful, and it's refreshing to hear you jump on your RC8 and go quicker than you've been. That's a good. I mean, that's why we buy these things, to go quicker. Yep.
And look cool doing it.
Boom.
Well, yeah. If you can go fast, look cool at least doing it.
You co-founded the Utah Sport Bike Association, right? Is that still around?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're digging up some old stuff. Yeah, that I did. Yeah, we were Don DeBusk and I. He's passed now. Sean, Scott, Mitch Bame. We would all live in Salt Lake City. We all lived in Salt Lake City in college, high school, college, and we all bought sport bikes. And in fact, we all bought sport bikes. We tore them down every winter. All of our frames were red, painted red by Walt Allen. It was crazy. So anyway, there's a bunch of us running around on sport bikes up and down the canyons, having the time of our lives. And so Don DeBusk and I started this little USBA, Utah Sport Bike Association, just for fun. Made sweatshirts with the little logos on it and everything. And sure enough, it took off, and it's still going. It's still going strong. There's a race this weekend, as a matter of fact, at UMC Old Miller. So yeah, I founded that, but it's just a bunch of us guys cruising around having fun. And we wanted to go and practice in parking lots and stuff like that. So that's how it happened.
Good. You were also the lead instructor for 12 years for Fast Freddy and his school. How did that happen?
Well, I was, this was 96, 97. And I was asked to run a school at Willow Springs on Friday before the races. And this was back when there were, 1,200 people show up at these races, 1,200 racers would show up at these races. So they were getting a lot of new people coming in, and fast track riders asked me to run the school. And so, of course, what I did was I hired all my fast friends, my class champions, guys like Kent Kunitsugu, Lance Holst, Jason Black, Steve Michaelis, Andy Milton, #1 plate holder a bunch of times. I hired all those people to teach the school, and it went really well. And that 97, I was racing 250s at Las Vegas Raceway, and I'd written a letter to Honda saying that, hey, I'm running the school. I would love to run a school for you. And Honda wrote back and said, well, thank you, but we've got one guy ahead of you, in line ahead of you. And this, of course, was Freddie Spencer. And so at the Las Vegas race, they announced the Freddie Spencer Riding School would be at Las Vegas. And Honda, introduced us, and Honda had told me, you get your resume to Freddie as soon as you can. So I wrote my resume to send it to Freddie. And this was just, 3 or 4 days after the announcement, he got my resume. And it was really a combination of two people that were totally into it, but from different sides of the track. I was a street rider who did some racing and did okay at nationals, but nothing like Freddie, world champion and everything else. So it just was a great combination. I was a writer, which helped a lot because I could help with write curriculums, and putting the program together is kind of a fascinating deal, because the information, there's really not much new riding technique information, but there is definitely a secret to the way it's put together, the order it's in. And that we really tweaked on that. And one of the things that Freddie insisted upon, and I thank God he did, is trail braking. He really wanted to have trail braking in the program, trailing brake pressure into the corner, all the smoothness and all the body position, all that stuff, that was all in the ballpark. But the fact that he wanted to teach trail braking was huge. And that was one of the things I was super happy with. So that's how Freddie Spencer happened. And then we started doing schools, and he and I became friends. And over the years, hung out with each other, visited each other's homes. And I just reconnected with him, and he's going to be coming to 4 Champions Riding Schools this winter. So he'll be to a couple of our California schools and our Homestead school, and just come and hang out and be Freddie Spencer.
Very nice.
Yeah, excited.
Speaking of trail braking, the thing that kind of helped me, and it's not, by all means, it's not a good proper riding technique, is I was too afraid to trail brake until I got a bike with an ABS, and it wouldn't stop. right? The ABS would just kick in. So I had no choice but to trail brake. And I kind of, trusted the ABS not to lock it because it was too loose anyway. And that's how I started trail braking.
Well,
I had no
it's,
choice.
Yeah. And if you think about it, Gal, if you go to the brakes and you can't get the bike stopped, you'll be forced to use your brakes at lean angle. And this is what we're really pushing on. And you probably see it on our social media, certainly in Champ U, this new online program we've come out in, is that we should be comfortable trailing brake pressure into the corner. And simply put, as we add lean angle percentages, we give away braking percentages. If we're holding our lean angle, we can hold our brake pressure. And of course, that becomes a huge thing because as you slow your motorcycle at a given lean angle, your radius tightens. And that is really what starts to save your ass. So the fact that you couldn't get the bike slowed in a straight line forced you to trail brake, but now I'm sure you're a believer, even though we've never spoken about this, right?
Yeah. And I try to put as much weight as I can on the front tire when I do it.
That's right.
I just move forward.
Yeah.
And just a smooth transition from the brake all the way to the apex almost, and then smooth through the gas. So it kind of forces you when a motorcycle doesn't want to do what you want it to do, and you start riding past the damn electronics, then you kind of develop better riding habits, I think.
Well, you can be forced into it, and so many of these racers take ABS off their bikes, or certainly turn it down to the lightest scale. Just for everybody's listening out there, we run ABS on all of our school bikes, and of course, students have seen how fast the instructors go on stock Yamahas on a Dunlop Q3 Plus, and very rarely will we get into front ABS. Quite frequently rear, of course, because rear's off the ground so much, but very rarely we'll get into front ABS. So everybody out there who is struggling with ABS, if your initial brake pressure is too quick, you'll trigger ABS before the tire gets loaded. If the ABS triggers late in the braking zone, that just means it's working as your tire nears lockup. But what we believe happens is people put a very sticky tire, let's say a very sticky front tire on their bikes, and the ABS setting is for a stock tire. And all of a sudden, the pressure that the front will accept is not in the computer. So that's why a lot of people will pull the ABS fuse. Just be cautious that you don't pull the ABS fuse and take the TC fuse and take the TC out of it as well. I mean, just figure that out. But very few racers use ABS.
Yeah, my next bike is not going to have ABS.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Where is it on?
Bikes.
Yeah.
Gal's secret trick about adding weight to the front is he adds it to his waistline.
And
then he moves the body forward. And somebody needs to explain to him that this is not the way to it.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't clear on that then.
Look, I'm like an athlete, only a very bad athlete. So I gain weight during the wintertime and then I drop it before the first track day. But Kerry's been building that bike for so long that
right.
I kept adding weight, and I think I'm at 220 now. So
this is Kerry's fault.
Yeah, it's really Kerry's fault.
Yeah.
It's not the Vegas. It's not the Vegas buffets, that's for sure.
Yeah. When someone says their weight, I always think about Anthony Gobert. He said, "I'm going to see how fat I can get and still beat all the Americans." That's what he had said that quite famously. So, but that idea of weight forward is such a big thing, and we can put weight forward by rolling off the throttle. That does put weight forward, but adding brake pressure, front brake controls speed for sure, and that's what everybody thinks. I need the brakes because I'm for speed control, but it also controls steering geometry. You can more finely control your fork travel with the brake pressure rather than rolling off. And the third thing it controls is that front tire contact patch. So something for riders who have crashed off the front, lost the front, and they think I use too much brakes at too much lean angle. But I'll bet you the majority of amateur riders are off the front brake too quickly. They unload the front fork rebounds, makes a contact patch small, and they fall off the front because they let go of the brakes too quickly. So everybody out there listening to this, realize that how you let go of brake pressure on the front is how the fork rebounds. You snap off that brake, the fork rebounds quickly, contact patch gets small. And this has helped so many of our students who come into the school saying, you know what, I keep crashing off the front, and they always think they've overloaded it. And what we'll show them as we go through the school is that it's rarely the amount of brake pressure that crashes off the front. It's almost always the abruptness of the brake pressure or the abruptness of the lean angle. They've got the brakes on and they flick some lean angle, or they've got lean angle and they grab the brakes and they fall off an overloaded front. The most common way to fall off the front, from our opinion and experience, is getting into the corner and snapping off the brake and unloading and falling down. That is definitely 99% of cold tire crashes. People come in without the front loaded on a cold tire and fall down, because now all of a sudden the small contact patch that they've created by letting go of the brakes is cold and they're down.
Yeah, I think Eric Bostrom,
So
when
this
we
is-
interviewed him, and he said you got to teach the rider how to make grip. If you have them understand how to make grip, you'll go much faster.
Well, one of the issues for people trail braking is they don't come into the corner with enough speed. So they get all their braking done before they tip in the bike. And actually some schools started teaching this, at least at the lower levels, to keep the riders safe, and it's a bad habit to brake. What's a good advice for someone to just increase their speed so they can start actually using trail braking?
Nabil, that's a great point. And we have this all the time. And even in our own riding, even in your riding, my instructor's riding, and the instructors are, expert level, national level riders, will overbrake for a corner on a new track, especially. So what we'll teach and what we would have your listeners do, two things. One, go to the brakes at the same spot where you're nervous, because that's what we teach. And that's what we believe that riders do. We go to the brakes when we're nervous about making the corner, and we'll deal mostly with front brake. So you go to the brakes where you're nervous, but go to them so much lighter. And we get people saying out loud, lighter, longer. So go to the brakes where you're like, man, I'm a little bit nervous about this corner, but go to them lighter so you'll be forced to use them longer. That's the number one thing we'll do, is lighter, longer. And all of a sudden you get into the corner and you get your bike to the slowest point in the corner. That's a huge part of our school, the slowest point. Where does the bike need to be going the minimum mile an hour at the lean angle you choose? That's the slowest point. If you can get to that slowest point with your brakes on, you'll more repeatedly hit that point. And that's the secret to the incredible consistency you see at the top level, is they get the bike in on a low line, outside line, passing line, full tank of fuel, worn out tires, no fuel, and they run the same exact lap time because they get the bike to the slowest point of the corner with the brakes on. And for amateur, newer riders, we'll teach them to go to the brakes lighter, so they've got to use them longer. The second thing is, and this is, I think, especially for street riders, where we are, and I street ride daily with my wife, my friends, we love to street ride. Because we're limited by speed limits and also common sense, if you're going quick on the street, it will hurt so badly when there's truly a surprise, because you won't be able to recover. So we really do push for that 30% margin of safety on the street. If you're approaching a corner that is, let's say, a 45-mile-an-hour corner at your lean angle, and you're approaching at 55 miles an hour, which is the speed limit, we would ask our students to carry that 55-mile-an-hour longer to the corner, longer towards the corner, so when they close the throttle, they cannot make the corner just with closed throttle. They need a little bit of brake pressure. And all of a sudden, they'll start to realize, boy, I'll just carry my speed, my 55-mile-an-hour speed longer, close the throttle later, so I've got to brake past the tip in. And if everybody will think about the true solution to the problems we're having in corners, and that's the number one place that motorcycle riders are dying, all by themselves in corners, intersection corners, back road corners. If riders will leave your brake light on past the tip in, so light up your brake light because you're nervous, and leave that brake light on past the tip in, turning with your brakes on. Riders, is something as simple as that. All of a sudden, you're controlling your speed, geometry, and contact patch into the corner, and your life changes like that. And if you think to yourself, you're sitting there going, man, I don't think I can do that. You're doing it in your car already. We watch this all the time. We're seeing grandma in the minivan trailing brake pressure into the right-hand turn in our freeway. We see drivers coming into the freeway on-ramp and trailing brake pressure as they add steering wheel angle. So you're already doing it. You already have the feel for it. And we're asking you to leave the brake light on past the tip in, and all of a sudden you're into the corner with your geometry controlled and your contact patch. So, the last thought on this, we're saying, go to the brakes lighter so you can use them longer, number one. Number two, hold your speed a little bit longer, so you got to use the brakes later to make the corner. And the overall idea here, and this is what I would love your readers to try, because we can solve our safety issues with some of these simple things, is you're going towards a corner you've never seen before. You go to the brake because you're nervous. You tip into the corner with your brake on, and you get in the corner too slowly, and you realize, I'm not hurt. You rarely ever get hurt entering the corner too slowly. Next weekend, next lap, next month, you realize this corner's faster. I can brake lighter. I can brake later, or maybe I don't need the brakes for this corner. But if you'll enter the corner with your brakes on and get in too slowly, you're not hurt. And I would do anything Eric Bostrom says. That dude, national champion, right? Those are the kind of people, when Eric Bostrom says riders need to learn to create grip, it's because he doesn't roll off and hope his front tire is loaded. Eric Bostrom, national champion, rolls off and loads the front with that brake. And that's what separates those guys from the people that are finished 5th and 6th and 7th. They're not using their brakes in places Eric is. They're off the brakes before Eric. Eric leaves that thing loaded and gets the bike pointed, all those things.
That and they're a little bit bigger than us in some areas.
Yes, that's a big thing too.
Yeah. Well, he had a really cool course. Now they sold the house, but it was a dirt track.
Yeah.
Kind of a flat dirt track, and he would put knobbies on like 125s, knobbies in the front, slicks in the rear, or street tires in the rear, and wet the grounds, and then you had to basically trail brake and you had to accelerate out of the corner with almost no grip. You had a lot of grip on the front.
Yeah.
So he taught you how to trail brake and control the bike, and then coming out was like a show.
Yes, so, that's very cool. Yeah, those guys are great guys, and we go dirt bike riding here in Colorado. My wife's on an XT250, trail braking everywhere, and it's she's not trail braking because I said so or because Freddie or anybody. She's trail braking because she wants to control those things in the corner. And when you're on unknown roads and you're trail braking in the corner, all of a sudden the emergencies are so reduced. So it's a big thing. I'd like to make sure riders that are hearing me realize I don't believe it's optional. I don't believe you can trail brake or not trail brake. In corners you brake for, leave your brake light on past the tip in. And if you ever go riding with me and you're behind me, you'll see that brake light on into the corners, not just for speed, but because I want to get my brake pads against my brake rotors. I want to have my front loaded. I want to have my brakes in place in case things go wrong. And corner tightens, there's an elk standing there, pick your excuse. And all of a sudden you've got that brake loaded. And this is what we're fighting so much, is getting riders to get out of the idea of letting go of the brakes before they turn. Nope, leave your brakes on, tip in with the brakes on. And as you two know, it's only going to be 2 or 3% of brake pressure. It's not going to be these huge brake pressures. It's just leaving the brake light on past tip in. You're already doing it in your car. We're saying the best riders in the world do it on their bikes.
Yeah. And wings also help.
Boom.
How about rear brake? A lot of people hesitate using rear brake in corners. Some people are for it. A lot of people are for it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, you're seeing a huge deal with rear brake in Grand Prix, certainly in Moto America. Kyle Wyman, one of our senior instructors, runs a thumb brake. You'll see Grand Prix bikes. Are we going to be on film or just voice?
Film as well.
Okay, good. So I'm making all these hand signals.
As long as Nabil edits the video, because I'm still waiting for like two videos prior.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't care either way. But if we're on film, you'll see a Grand Prix bike, and you'll see 2 levers on the left-hand side. This lever here is the clutch. They only let go of that one time during a race. This lever here is the rear brake. They put a rear brake, scooter rear brake on a lot of Grand Prix bikes. You'll see. I know when Garrett Gerloff won at NJMP, I watched him use the rear brake in 3B. All these guys are playing with it. So it's definitely part of the deal. And as you two know, doing track days, what would you do at some point? What would you do to find 2 more seconds? If you go 2 seconds a lap quicker, what would you do? Well, a lot of racers would sell the house to find 2 seconds, because 2 seconds would put them on pole. Even a second would put them on pole in Grand Prix. You could be on the 4th row and be a second off in Grand Prix. And so they are really looking for these little ways to find speed, and rear brake becomes that small way to find speed. The times you don't want to use it are when the front brake is on heavy, and that, of course, unloads the rear and it's off the ground. If the rear tire is off the ground, there's no rear brake available. it locks, it gets to be a problem. But if the rear tire is on the ground, there's rear brake available. And so, for instance, 10B at NJMP, and I know there's a lot of listeners out there that have been to New Jersey Motorsports Park. 10B would be a great place to play with that rear brake, because remember, a slowing motorcycle tightens its radius at the same lean angle. So sneak on, close the throttle, sneak on a little bit of rear brake, and the bike slows and turns very, very well. In the overall percentages, we say at the school that front brake on a sport bike, short road racer sport bike, 97% duty of stopping, slowing. The rear brake is 3%, but at some point in your life, 3% becomes a big thing. And it could be this weekend. It could be you load up, you load up, if you got your son or daughter on the back, you come into a downhill corner that tightens, you've got the front brake on, you're at a lot of lean angle, and you can sneak on that rear brake, and that whole bike slows better and turns. All of a sudden you stay in your lane because you've practiced 1 or 2 or 3% of rear brake, and a slowing motorcycle tightens its radius. So the rear brake's a big thing for us. We leave it alone until day 2 because it's not a huge priority, but at some point, downhill right-hander corner tightening in the rain, not a lot of grip, and you got front and rear brake available. It's a huge deal.
It's one of those things that are so complicated, at least for me to comprehend, that when I watched a video that Sylvain Guintoli put on YouTube about when he's using it, and I was like, yeah, it's not for me. I remember, Doohan was using it. He was the first guy that put it on the handlebar because he messed up his ankle. And then Kevin Schwann said, yeah, I'm not touching the rear brake. And I was like, yeah, I want to be as fast as Kevin Schwann, so I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna touch it. And it's one of those things that I never went back to because it's just too much on my brain.
It's overloaded. And I think Sylvain said that he never touched it to win the Superbike World Championship, and then couldn't get around well enough on a GP bike without it. So everybody listen out there, just as long as you have it in your toolbox, as long as you play with it. And what happens is, if we run off the track into the grass, if we've got front and rear brake available, we stop the bike better. If you run wide into a parking lot or someplace you can brake and you got front and rear brake available, it's a big thing. We use it for a couple other reasons, and I'll refer to those. One of them is the traction monitor. If you know how your rear tire feels when it locks up on dry pavement when it's hot, you can now begin to lock your rear tire in a straight line to determine how hot your rear tire is. And this happens all the time. We'll jump on bikes at the school, and we won't. It's an instructor bike. We don't know if the instructor just rode it, it's got hot tires, or it's been sitting, because we could feel the tire, but we forget. And off we go down the pit lane, and you'll see the instructors pull the clutch in and rear brake it just to see, okay, if it stops really well, it's hot, and we are happy with it. If it locks up right away, ABS is right away, we know it's cold. And that's a perfect example. We'll use rear brake against the throttle occasionally, not ever front brake against the throttle. That's a really big but common myth out there. We want to close the throttle completely to the front brake, come off the brake completely back to the throttle. So never overlap the front brake and throttle for a lot of reasons we can talk about, but we will overlap rear brake and throttle. For instance, we all have FC1s at the school. We do them 2-up bikes, all that stuff. We'll use FC1 rear brake against the throttle in big, fast, sweeping corners where knees on the ground, we're accelerating, and we'll use a little bit of rear brake to make sure we don't spin it up, non-TC bike. We use a lot of rear brake on 2-up laps because, and this is what Sylvain's talking about, as you close the throttle to the front brake lever, so you roll off the throttle to the front brake lever, as you start to close your throttle, Sylvain and the instructors on the 2-up laps will sneak on some rear brake. That rear caliper clamping that disc slows front weight transfer. So the rear shock rebounds slower because it's being clamped by that brake. As we close the throttle, it's rear brake, but as we build front brake, the rear will come out of it. So that's why you're overwhelmed, right? Now you're like, well, I can't really think about all that. But Sylvain will say, as he closes the throttle, he's in the rear. As he builds front pressure, the rear comes out because the rear is off the ground. And as he puts the front pressure back and gives away front brake, he'll go sneak back into the rear. And it's the best place to mess with all this stuff is on a dirt bike. We all have dirt bikes. We all play around on dirt bikes. And just for someone like Sylvain to talk about that kind of stuff, it is overwhelming, but at some point it should make sense. So just think about this. Before he builds any front brake, he's in the rear. That slows rear rebound. It slows the bike too. As he builds front brake, he's out of the rear because it's off the ground. As he gives away front brake and the rear tire comes back in contact, he might sneak on some more rear. And so the beautiful thing about the sport, in my opinion, is how logical it is. There's very few mysteries that can't be explained, whether they're correct technique or incorrect technique.
Okay, so twice when you're slowing down at first,
Yeah.
before the tire comes off the ground, before the front sinks, and then the second time when it comes back on the ground and you're already starting to trail brake, basically.
Exactly right. And so you can see, Gal, why so many people want a rear brake on the handlebar, because you will have trouble with body position in right-handers as you rear brake it. You'll love it in left-handers. And I'll tell you, for all the people listening out there, especially those who are open-minded, you know, if you want to be good at this sport, you better get really open-minded, because there'll be some things that you are trying to do on your own that do not work. And at some point you got to say, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to try something else. And we have a saying at our school, and it is for curriculum, it's for instructors, it's certainly for students. If I'm wrong, I want to be wrong for as short a time possible. That's such a great saying to think. And you know, everybody who's been to our school, when they come back to the school, they say, man, you guys have changed things. And we say, yeah, we've changed things. So we want to get better. And I think anybody who comes to our school, certainly I hope people listening to this, you want to get better. And if you're open-minded, you can. So put this in your brains. During the 2-up laps on the FC1s and the MT10s, where we put students on the back, it's not mandatory, but almost. If the rear brake boils the fluid out of it, which has happened occasionally on super hot days, bunch of 2-ups in a row, we boil the fluid out of the rear brake, the 2-up lap suffers. It suffers, and it is very, I won't say very difficult. It's much, I won't say that. It's more difficult to do a good 2-up lap without the rear brake. It's that big a thing.
Wow.
It's, yeah, you just blew our minds.
Yep. Well, it's part of the deal. I raced a very fast TZ750 for all these years, 5-6 years, Rusty Bigley's bike, and we had to get the rear brake working because the person who raced it before me never touched it. But I needed the rear brake because the thing would wheelie 3rd and 4th gear. So all of a sudden we got wheelie control, traction control. If we run off, I got a rear brake. I've got rear brake to slow weight, front weight transfer. And that final one, the rear brake to slow front weight transfer, is the priority for people like Chris Paris, Kyle Wyman, Cody Wyman, these instructors of mine. That's really what they want the rear brake for. And I can't wait till you try it, because it could be that last little bit to corner entry that smooth things out.
I will definitely give it a try.
Yep.
I'll let you know if you come back in an ambulance.
Yeah.
Nick, that class of riders that will lap you on a 2-up.
Yeah.
Would be doing our best on our motorcycles, and he'll pass us with a 2-up twice in a session.
That's what they are. And we do the 2-up as an instructional thing. It is, and we will tell students, if you're freaked out, first of all, your eyes are too low. But if you're freaked out by the speed, just tap the instructor on the chest and say, hey, it's too fast. And we'll tell students, if you get done with a 2-up lap and it was freaky fast and you didn't learn a thing, do it again, because the instructor went too fast for you. It was overwhelming. Because if you had a 2-up lap, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah. If you can process it, if it's not too crazy, if you can process it, it's a huge learning curve. People get off these 2-up laps and they go, I had no idea my tires would do that. I had no idea that's how hard these people brake. I couldn't believe how much rear grip we have. And then the question is, well, did the instructor ever grab the brakes or stab the throttle? No, he never did that. The instructor ever flicked the bike in the corner? No, he never did that. And the point is, they weren't going smooth, so the student thought they were going smooth. They were going smooth because that is the only way to ride that fast. So that instruction on the 2-up is mind-boggling. And you can imagine students show up at our school, they've never been on the back of a motorcycle. I mean, they're 45-year-old men. They're not getting on the back of the motorcycle, and we convince them to do it, and they're so glad they do. So anybody who can get a 2-up from a qualified pilot, it's helpful.
I have a question.
That being the revelation for me.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, I can't believe that bike can slow down so hard, can accelerate so hard, how early people get on the throttle. I mean, you learn a lot if you have time to take some mental notes through that. And then you get instantly faster, because then you're less scared. Because, well, if the bike can do this, then I'm not going to get myself in trouble if I apply the right techniques.
That's exactly right. That's the idea behind it. I'm glad it hit you that way, because it can be thought of as a thrill ride. In fact, we put people in our vans and we have to say, you know what, this isn't just for fun. This isn't just to learn the track. This is because we're going to drive the van as closely as we can to how we ride a motorcycle. Steering wheel angle is lean angle. And all of a sudden, students leave that school, our school, with the idea that when I drive my car, truck, van, I'm driving it like I'm riding my motorcycle. And that will really help people out there, thinking about trail braking, initial throttle, all those things.
So did my friend Brian Burgess, did he get a 2-up ride, and
Yeah.
how did his face look like after?
Well, is he a police officer?
He is, yeah, he teaches. He's in Europe now.
Yeah.
I asked him to come on the podcast, but he's in Europe, in Germany right now till the end of the month. He trains all the police officers in Vegas.
That's what it was, yeah. And he's buddy with Steve Ritchie and all those guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, he trains at my school in jiu-jitsu, so that's
cool.
how I know him. Yeah,
Yep.
half the people in my school are cops.
Yep. Well, I bet he got a 2-up lap, because we do try to push people to it, and I would think he did. And that's a perfect example of a guy who, he's in charge. He runs the race programs, he does for training programs. He's a police officer. To give up that ego and to say, okay, I'm going to sit on the back of this bike and trust this person to do it. And I will say to anybody who's going to come to our school, we take the 2-up laps as seriously as we take a national. And it'll be Isaiah Davis, Cody Wyman, Kyle Wyman, Michael Haynow, me, Chris Paris. It's a very limited group doing the 2-up laps because they are so serious. And so I think we probably had to convince Brian of that a little bit.
All right, I have. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nabil.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know where you want to go next, Gal, but I was going to say we've talked a lot about the corner entry. Maybe we should talk about the exit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know if you want to mention something before, Gal.
Yeah, I was gonna go to the questions. We're already almost an hour into it. We haven't started with the questions yet.
Well, we're talking riding techniques. This is
okay. All right. Okay. Riding techniques.
Well,
okay.
I think my personal opinion is people would like to tune in if they hear it's me and they know what I do for a living. They'd like to hear riding techniques, not necessarily about my life. And I'm much more comfortable talking about riding techniques, especially because there's some weird things going on in the industry where a year or so ago, they were upset that the motorcycle industry wasn't growing. And then they had a big roundtable and they discussed, the price of bikes, the price of insurance, the number of things that people can do that aren't motorcycle related in America, and how diverse America is for things they do. None of they talked about this, they talked about that. And they never talked about new riders learning the wrong things. And how do you grow a business if you can't keep the new customers in it? And so as on the outside of that circle going, hey, wait, there's one more thing you're forgetting, riding technique. And I know, obviously been doing this a long time. I'm really into doing this. I'm into doing this because of the life that motorcycling has given me. My father was a motorcyclist. Even my mother got her license when she was 53 years old. I met my wife, Judy, at a racetrack. All my best friends are racers and riders, and I live for it. I like y'all. You guys just started to start a podcast, spend money on something you weren't sure were going to work because you love the sport, and bringing in Colin and all the people you've spoken with. It's a big thing. So we all love this. And so my give back is to tell people what works and what doesn't work based on my opinion and experience. So the number one place we're dying is running wide in corners. If we'll trail brake pressure in the corner, trail that geometry control in the corner entry gets a lot easier. In fact, it changes. Everything changes. Your bike steers better with geometry, weight forward. But the second part of it is people have heard, when in doubt, power out. People have heard you should be braking or you should be accelerating to be efficient. People have heard brake. This is crazy. It's on the internet. Brake, get off the brakes, gas, and then turn. Completely opposite of what's right. So the second part of the corner, you trail the brakes into the corner, trail brake into your corner until you're happy with two things, and that is speed and direction. So you trail the brakes into the corner until you're happy with speed and direction. In other words, your brain calms down and says, I'm going to make this corner. That's as simple, and we all drive this way. We all ride this way. Trail brake pressure in, or at least decelerate into the corner if you're not braking. But of course, your fingers are up on the brake lever just in case. So you trail brake in, happy with speed and direction. That's taking care of the entry. But between braking, coming off the brakes, and accelerating, building mile an hour, is neutral or maintenance throttle. And guys, neutral or maintenance throttle does not get spoken about enough. Everybody says brake, accelerate, but between braking and accelerating, before you accelerate your motorcycle, you go to neutral throttle, and then neutral throttle is a different percentage of throttle depending on the bike, car, or whatever. On a slower bike, neutral throttle, which holds your speed, we call it maintenance throttle because your speed is maintained mid-corner. On a small bike, R3, you'll use quite a bit of throttle, maybe 21% of throttle to hold your speed. On a fast bike, right, your KTM, it'll be 0.5% of throttle to hold your speed. So you pick up enough throttle to hold your speed. And riders, you stay at that speed until two things come into play. Number one, you can see your exit, the road's opening, the track is opening, and number two, you can take away lean angle. Because in the back, just like the front, we have only 100% of lean angle available. So the riders that are at 97 points of lean angle and add 5 points of acceleration spin the rear tire. So neutral throttle, maintenance throttle, you're holding your lean angle, you're waiting for the corner to open so you can take away lean angle. And in some corners, I know in the Colorado canyons I ride, I lived in California for dozens of years, you've got to hold that throttle for a long time, seconds. Your bike should sound like that. Just waiting. Streets of Willow, corners like that. You're just waiting until those two things come into play, and then you get to accelerate only when you can see the exit, take away lean angle. And all of a sudden your life changes and you quit struggling with these running wide issues. You trail the brakes into the corner, controlling your geometry and speed till you're happy with speed and direction. You come off the brakes and go to neutral throttle. You hold your speed in the corner until you can see the exit, take away lean angle. When that happens, you get to accelerate the bike in a linear fashion as you take away lean angle. And not only does street riding become super joyful and speeds will increase up to the speed limit, of course, but you show up at these track days and you get put in the B group right away. You work your way through A group right away. You ask to be a control rider. You go to ARMA and you win because you're not crashing your brains out. You're not trying to make the corner anything that it isn't. You break into, you're happy, you hold your speed, and you accelerate off the corner, and you apply that to the next corner and the next corner, and all of a sudden, you get to be doing what I get to do. I show up at these ARMA races, and I get to win on any bike I touch, knock wood so far, thank you God, but because I'm riding this way. And so, Nabil, when you ask about the corner entry and exit, those are the things we chase. And you both are nodding your heads. You're both going, yeah, that makes perfect sense. You already knew it. You may not have heard explained this way, but you already knew that's what you should be doing. And so you run wide in a corner because you jump off the brakes or you don't brake. And of course, radius equals miles per hour, so your bike runs wide. Or number two, when you get in the corner, you snap on the throttle, the forks extend, right, engineers? The forks extend and the bike is designed to run wide. So now you're accelerating too early, and of course, the bike no longer steers. And it doesn't matter. I mean, look at some of the talent these racers have. They cannot accelerate the bike until they can take away lean angle because they know it'll spin or it'll run wide. So that's how we start to talk about it in that type of wording.
Yeah. So a couple of questions on specifics. One thing I've heard, I think that was Eric at the time. There's a point when you're trail braking, you keep the throttle closed, and there's a point where the bike pivots. Like there's a notable improvement in how the bike turns, and you never opened the throttle before that. How do you reconcile this with a longer turn where you actually have to have maintenance throttle? So some turns you can V, you're basically braking to the point the bike pivots, you accelerate out, there's very little neutral throttle. And some other have a longer one. Is that even applicable in a situation like that?
Well,
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
like turn two, Big Willow.
Yeah, turn to a fourth gear corner. If you don't know anybody, third, fourth gear corner, slightly uphill. And I'll just put my hand up here, and I hope we get the video going. Nabil, get to work.
Yep.
And I'll put my hand here, and I wonder if I can take my wedding ring off and put it on my other finger here because I'm used to just taking my wedding ring off in bars. So I don't know.
That depends if your wife's in the house or not.
Yeah. So all right. So everybody can see my ring there, maybe.
Yeah.
So this is a long radius corner. Turn to it, Willow. Let's say pretty close. We'll get in. We'll trail brake in, and we know at some point this is where the bike pivots, right, Nabil? This is where the bike has to pivot. The bike pivots, whatever, and I don't want everybody to think it pivots. It's just where the direction change has to take place, ideally. Between my finger, where we get done with the brakes, and that, you can actually accelerate a little bit and turn two. you can actually accelerate up to the point the rear tire is ready to spin, and at that point you hold your speed. So you get up to neutral throttle where the bike is at the limit of grip on the rear, and you hold it right in here, right where my ring is. You might want to close the throttle gently, put weight forward, probably won't need the brakes on most bikes. Close the throttle gently, put weight forward, the fork collapses gently, the mile an hour slows, radius is mile an hour comes down, the bike pivots, points, and then you get to go again. And Nabil, the people who will not close their throttle here, they don't have the discipline. They have the skill to close the throttle. They don't have the discipline. They're trying to get the bike driving back here. Remember, we can only accelerate when we can see the exit, take away lean angle. You can't see the exit or take away the lean angle back here. So you maintain that speed. The best riders will maintain that speed at the limit of grip. And that's up to your risk tolerances, etc. But we maintain that speed right here. But right here, the bike closes the throttle gently, the weight goes forward, the bike changes direction, and then we get to drive it out. And that's the secret to these long radius corners. Don't get too sweaty about get in as fast as you can, hold your speed, make sure you get the bike pointed. And what will happen, I'll put my ring back on there. What will happen during practice on these long radius corners, you'll start to accelerate back here and the bike will run wide and you'll have to hold your throttle. You won't be able to truly accelerate off the corner. On the street, that is fatal because now the bike runs wide into this oncoming traffic. Here's the truck right here and you've picked the throttle up, accelerated too early. So everything we teach will certainly help our graduates win races. And it's kind of crazy when you look at Moto America, the number of graduates at the front, it's crazy, or instructors at the front. It's crazy. We're kind of the best kept secret in American road racing because we're expensive and no one says I went to the school, but it's amazing how many graduates. They know they've got to let the bike point here. So here we got a truck coming and the rider lets the bike point and now they find out the truck is partly in their lane. They leave the throttle shut longer, the bike points longer, goes underneath the truck in their lane, and it becomes very, very safe. So the secret is realizing where does the direction change happen? In this case, turn 2, long radius corners, it happens quite late, close the throttle gently. Does that help?
Absolutely, yeah. So it doesn't have to be braking, pivot, accelerate. It could be braking and then accelerate if it's a long turn, or at least maintain, and then roll off, point, and then go.
You got it. And that we would like to brake to the slowest part of the corner, but if you think about my turn 2 again, the slowest part of the corner is somewhere here, certainly corner entry. But so, and you know, I did well at Willow Springs, and I rode Wayne Rainey's 500 Grand Prix bike there. I rode Matt Mladen's sewer bike there back in the day when they let journalists ride these bikes, right? And on these bikes, but my 250 is probably my most knowledgeable bike there. FCR 600, I did well on that thing too. Right here, I knew that's where the slowest part of the corner was. So as we turn the bike in, we'll trail brake in, get in as fast as we can, pick the throttle up, load the rear tire, put the load in gently, At this point, start to accelerate up to the point where the rear tire, two things, rear tire either starts to spin or at the limit, or the bike runs too wide. So we will accelerate gently, probably gaining, 12 miles an hour maybe, accelerating to the point where, oh shoot, now the bike's got to turn, roll off and let it turn. And the riders that don't roll off here, you pass them on the brakes into 3 because they don't get direction. So don't feel shy about accelerating mid-corner, because remember, if you have grip and your rear tire can handle it, we will accelerate mid-corner.
Great, thank you. So then the corollary to that question is tire spin and how much gas. How do you learn to put on more and more gas as you exit? So, I'm still very conservative.
Good.
Never had traction control. And so I'm always afraid of opening the throttle too much. So I kind of coast a little longer probably, and I'm more comfortable with a lower lean angle before I start accelerating. And I've always wondered, how do you learn to, kind of be more aggressive without killing yourself? So is that easy to feel tire spin? Is there some signs where, okay, now I've pointed the bike, it's time to start accelerating even before I'm usually comfortable?
Yeah, there's this is the question we all ask, right? I mean, I was number 2 in the nation in 250 Grand Prix, mainly because Rich Oliver and Jimmy Felice, the 2 people who beat me, got more out of their tires. They would get closer to that 100% of rear grip than I would. I'd come off the corner at 97% of rear grip, 3% underneath the tire spinning, and they'd come all off the corner at 100, among other things. But let's say that's one of the main things that we do. So there's a couple ways to do it. One is get on dirt bikes. Do you have a dirt bike?
No, but I've got on some before.
Get on dirt bikes. Go to these dirt track schools. Colin Edwards got one. Rich Oliver has a really good one. Danny Walker, Gary LaPlante, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but we also have Champ Mini, which we put you on mini road racers. And on a dirt bike, you get to feel that rear and get a feel for it. On a road racer, if everybody will understand on a road racer, the tire will take a tremendous load, but not an abrupt load. So at Willow Springs, back in the day, people would crash in turn 2, going slower than the race winner because they'd initial throttle too quickly. They put the load in before the weight could transfer back. So if you put that load in gently and add it in a linear fashion, and turn 2 is a perfect place to play with it. You're hung off, full body off, knee out, the whole thing, and start to just accelerate with your mind only on one thing, rear grip. So you in turn 2, long radius corner, accelerating, feeling that rear grip, that linear fashion. Snap it on, you hurt yourself, be cautious of that, but getting a feel for that rear grip. And just so you know, and everybody listening knows, we're always searching for that, all of us. With a TC bike like you have, especially a KTM with a high level TC, it'll start to flash, it'll start to detune, but that's a good place to play with it. Remember, your hand moves linearly, the tire will spin linearly. And it will tell you, it'll yell up and say, hey, I'm at the limit of grip. TC's clicking on, or the thing's just starting to move around a little bit. I promise you, on a hot tire with linear throttle, the tire will spin and tell you gently what to do, for sure. Coming off the corner, if everybody will really pay attention to Grand Prix, World Superbike, etc., watch how the riders drop their head on corner exit. Josh Hayes talked about stand the bike up gently and leaving his head there. In other words, to leave your weight offset acceleration. If you think about what we're doing with head drop on corner exit, we are offsetting acceleration. If we lifted our head and accelerated, the bike would run wide. We don't want that just yet. We don't want to run wide just yet. So we'll drop our head on acceleration. And if anybody wants to really overdo one thing, it's that head drop on acceleration, and watch how much more grip that rear tire has, because your radius stays the same due to body, not just lean angle. So I would really push you to drop your head, match that with your throttle acceleration.
Thank you. Great. That was just a master's course in corners, just right now.
Yeah, I don't think we ever heard it quite like that.
Yeah.
Before.
Well, I know, all of our personalities, certainly in running a school, you want to give best practices. And, we didn't call it Nick Ienatsch School or Chris Paris School or Kyle Wyman we didn't call it that. We call it the Champions School. What are the best in the world doing? A lot of us have won championships and that helps, but what are the best in the world doing? And you see them dropping their head on corner exit. So we would encourage our students to practice that. And we just luckily can fill in the reasons why. Don't do it because Quattraro does it. Do it because you can accelerate harder with head drop. And if there's one thing, if any ARMA people, racers are listening to this, especially riders older like me that learned back in the day when people were a little bit twisted up and they weren't moving around the bike as much. If there's anything that I believe most ARMA racers could do to improve safety and go faster, and that's quite a feat, right? Be safer and be faster, and it is all in body position. Whole cheek off, knee out, head drop on the exit, arm across the top of the fuel tank. Commit heavily to this because it makes you safer at the lap time you're running, or at the risk you're taking, it makes you faster. And that's our personalities, man. I want to show up at a racetrack and win. Is that fair to say?
Yep. Now, I have a good exercise that Carrie made me do one day, and Billy might benefit you if you want. So it was back when I started my very short career at WSMC. And I was using, since I didn't have mechanics, or it was just me and a truck, right? And what I do is I put the Pirelli Pro Slicks on my bike, and those were the tires with the red stripe. And those things, they didn't have a lot of grip, but they had a lot of feel. And I love those things because you can get 6 or 7 weekends out of those things. But when they go, they go. So when they get to the point where they're too worn out, that's it. It's like riding on glass. I went to a track day with Kerry back when he was doing the Hypercircle track days and Big Willow. And halfway through the day, the tires that I had six weekends on them already, which is unheard of for Big Willow. I mean, Big Willow, you can fry your slicks in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had 6 track days on them, and they were still, they were still good. They were sliding, but they were still, okay, I'm cheap. So halfway through the day, the tires, that's it. They just start sliding. I can't feel them, and I was like, yeah, this is dangerous. I'm pitting. I'm done for the day. And then Kerry comes around and goes like, what are you doing? And I go like, yeah, my tires are done. You want to put new tires on my bike? I'll go back out. And he goes like, no. Come on, just follow me. And it was just, I was trying to ride on glass and trying to figure out what the bike's doing when it's sliding around. Yeah. Following Kerry at a pace that was way too fast for those tires. And I followed him for a session, and I came back and I pitted it for the day. But that was the best exercise I ever had in how to slide a motorcycle around and still trying to figure out the balance. Yep. It just try going out on older tires. That's it.
Didn't Ben Spies talk about that, running old tires in practice and doing the same thing, right? Because the bottom line is that racers cannot win races on new tires. You've got to be able to win on a used tire. And I know Ben practiced on the lot, and it's an interesting thing. And yeah, there's some shortcuts to it. Dirt bikes, going to some of these dirt track schools, being on a tire that spins and gives you that feedback. It's an interesting deal. And Gal, if you think about what I know, we were at Freddie's school one day, and a student raised her hand and said, Freddie, will you ever teach us to ride in the rain? And Freddie said, that's all I'm doing. And so, in other words, Freddie was teaching a way to ride at any grip level, and that is the smooth inputs, because the tire will take a tremendous load, not an abrupt load. So that's kind of what you had to do, Gal, right? You had to smooth things out first day.
Yep.
Yeah, I've done it accidentally when I wore the tire down to the cord. And actually, I was getting coached by Chris Ulrich, and he follows me, and I'm sliding, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm MotoGP level now, right? Yeah. And he has me follow him, and I thought he wanted me to follow him faster. He actually pulls in the pits and goes, are you insane? Yeah, I can see the white on your tires.
Gotta get your money out of them.
But it was sliding.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
All right, we got some questions for you now. Your first proper superbike was a 1980 GS 1000S.
How do you know this?
I know everything.
Wow.
How did it compare to your prior bike, and what did you learn from it? And your prior bike, I believe, was an XT 500.
Okay, that's kind of crazy, but yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's very good.
You know why? If you Google me hard enough, you're gonna figure out that I have a psychic website.
I see. Oh boy. Okay, good. I'm a little nervous now. The XT 500 I got when I was 16. My dad was a motorcycle rider, thank goodness. And the GS 1000S was a West Cooley replica, if you remember those. And I still have it. I don't have the same one. I actually sold that one, the original one, to Mitch Boehm, and he crashed it up Little Cottonwood Canyon in Salt Lake. But sorry, Mitch, had to play under the bus there. But a few years later, I found one in Detroit, and I flew to when I was at the magazine. I flew to Detroit and bought it, and it's only 2 serial numbers different than my original one. So I do still have a GS 1000S, and I was a total novice forever. In fact, I took my bike into the Suzuki shop, for the Salt Lake Suzuki shop, for a 10,000-mile tune-up, and they said I have not revved it high enough yet to get any ring pressure to seat the rings in the cylinders. That's how I was. I rode with my dad. We rode to the Salt Lake Motorcycle Club. We went brum, brum, brum. So it could have been any bike, but it was beautiful. And of course, I became a Wes Cooley fan, and later got to meet him and all that stuff. So I was such a novice. I didn't know. We ended up getting a bunch of other bikes and getting faster in the canyons and stuff like that. But that 1000S, which I still have, was I can still smell a brand new bike, how it was, and it was such a big deal to me. And I ended up working at the Suzuki shop, becoming a flat rate mechanic during college for 4 years, 5 years, and ending up with 1,000 Katana, if you remember those, and all those things. So it started me into the deal. But to tell you about the XT500, I was down in Salt Lake City, and every Saturday, Friday night, we'd go down there. When my buddy had a big block Chevy truck, and all hopped up, and we took our cars down there and drag raced on the street. And looked at girls and stuff like that. So I would take my XT 600 or 500 down there, and it was quick, right? It was a single cylinder, 500cc, quick, in quotes. A Z1 comes next to me, and we're going to race. And I think, okay, here we go. And it was like this. We lined up like this. Z1, 900cc 4-cylinder, and my XT. And the light turned green, and it was like this. It was like a Roadrunner movie where I had bike had rolled 1 foot, and he was 1 mile down the road. And that really stuck with me, realizing that, what I had was crap. So anyway, I got to move up pretty quickly from there.
Let's talk about the 1984 Bimota KB3. How did you end up purchasing that bike? What did you do to it? I heard it had an engine that was not really an original engine. What did you do to that bike?
Yeah, well, that the Bimota thing was I'd heard about him, of course, when I was a civilian before I hired on the magazine. And in 1984, I got hired by Motorcyclist magazine, went down to Los Angeles to work, and I met a guy named Harry Mallet, and he owned the Bimota distributor, and he had the trickiest SB4, SB3 Bimota, and I got the chance to ride it and do stories on it. So from that moment on, I wanted a Bimota. And if back then they were tube frame, beautiful bikes, completely handmade with Japanese or some Italian motors in them. And so I found this KB3 that was in parts. It was complete junk. And Mike Worsham and Andre Castaños and I rebuilt it in Mike Worsham's garage. And Mike Worsham was and is an amazing machinist. We had it painted by Gerard Design, and it was very trick, not a stock piece on it, performance wheels and brakes. I'm not a big fan of too much stock stuff, with it one caveat, but I really like to have my own bikes. And so we painted it and did all sorts of cool things to it. And it would have a big block engine built back east, undercut transmission, all sorts of cool things. And it was a neat bike, I really enjoyed it. And it's still around. I sold it to not a friend of mine, but someone I know, and it's still in someone's collection. Do you know where it is?
I think it showed up on eBay at some point 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't really know where it is right now, but I'm sure it's going to pop up sometime in the future.
Yeah, and it was definitely a custom one-off Bimota, which is already pretty custom, but it was a neat bike. And but I got to a point in my life where I wasn't riding some of these bikes, and they were worth a lot of money. So I've always been able to sell a bike and buy a bike, sell a bike or two and buy a car, and I've always been able to kind of make that money work. Judy's a total motorhead. My wife's a total motorhead. And so she was into that. Okay, sell that and get something else. And it's kind of leapfrogged along,
Did you start Sport Rider?
Yeah, started Sport Rider. Yep.
So how was it being a journalist at the golden age of print magazines? I mean, the money, the women, the fame, the hotel rooms, right? The press launches.
Yeah, it was better than I could describe, because if you were a motorcycle enthusiast and you worked at a place where the bikes were free, the insurance was free, the fuel was free, the tires were free, track time was free, gear, all the gear you'd ever want. I still remember I still have my first leathers from Motorcyclist hanging on my garage wall. It was so very cool. And I was at a point in my life, I was 24 when I got hired. And I was at a point in my life, kind of through my dad's outlook, where I really did appreciate it. There's many times I looked around and said, this is really, really great. And I lived with Lance Holst and Jason Black. Those two guys, we started Sport Rider together. Lance and I especially started Sport Rider, and Jason Black came into it very soon. And so we lived together, we worked together, we weren't married, we just had the time. I mean, every day was testing, whether we were Sundays or Saturday, just testing. We had a rule that you had to go 100 miles an hour every day. That was a rule. So there was times getting on the Hollywood freeway, on a Ninja 250, you're tucked in, only get to 83 or whatever. But so it was really a great time. And it introduced me to some fabulous people, certainly Freddie. I met him as a journalist, but Eddie Lawson was a big part of my life. He and I did a story together over the years called Lawson's Lines, where he would talk about his Grand Prix, and his way of racing really rubbed off on me. His way of focusing so much on his riding, not worrying so much about bike setup, thinking about being so mentally into it and the techniques of it all, that really rubbed off on me. Scott Gray, Thomas Stevens, some of these national champions who really affected my riding and my teaching and my coaching and my racing. So the things I got from journalism were beyond belief. I really met my wife during that time. Some of my best friends I don't see them as much, but they're still some of my closest friends forever. Met my best man through the magazine and stuff. So it was one of those times. And you know, I can't imagine it being any better. Every year we went on a tour around America. That was part of the deal. We'd take a week or two off and go touring around America on bikes. And the best one, there are a lot of good ones, but the best one was when Montana had no speed limits, daytime speed limits. And we called it Montana Bond. Did you ever see that one? We called it Montana Bond. And so we took a ZX11, a Katana, and some other fastest production bikes we could get. And me and Lance and Jason, and we dragged along part of our staff and just went as fast as we could go, as fast as we could possibly go for a week. And I remember passing highway patrol and just and no one caring. It was
Tell him you know Brian.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, I'll do whatever I got to take. It's fair game.
Well, what do you think about what's going on now? I mean, it looks like everybody that owns a GoPro puts out, content out there and gets views and followers and gets, and makes a living out of it. When the fact of the matter is that they're not, even remotely qualified to say what they think about anything.
Well, that is an issue. That's definitely an issue that we've talked about. And I know when I read, I'm into cars pretty heavily. I think a lot of us are. When I read a Car and Driver, for instance, or whatever, I want to know who is speaking to me, who's the author, and I don't want to say that they need to have successful racing credentials, but at the same time, the saying is the better you ride, the more you know, and I mean bikes too. I know when I was at the magazines, Jason and Lance rode my TZ250 because it was the best bike out there. It was the best handling bike out there. So if you're riding a 600 Ninja and you've ridden a TZ250, you can put the Ninja into its place in the grand scheme of things. So I do think credentials are an issue, and I would really encourage those people doing that, making living, being these influencers and video journalists, is to really work on your riding, because you're writing to a pretty knowledgeable audience. It's crazy how knowledgeable motorcyclists are, and BS doesn't go very far. A poorly done video, poor pictures, misunderstanding of simple things like radius and mile an hour. I really would push everybody that's writing to the masses, because they have the passion. That's the problem. You can't downplay their passion. They have the passion for it, but I would encourage them to become as good as they can be, because the people they're writing to are extremely knowledgeable.
Yeah, they're good at understanding YouTube algorithms. They know where to push the content. They know SEO, and those are the things that they know that are lacking in the traditional journalism, right? I mean, I don't want to say you guys, because you don't do it full time anymore. I've seen you, write for Revzilla and Ienatsch Tuesday and all those columns. But you're a columnist now. But those are the things that are missing in journalism right now, the understanding of how to push the content out there in the most effective way, knowing when to push it, which RSS feeds to push it to, knowing how to monetize it correctly. Those are the things that those YouTubers have, and it gives them a pretty big stage for content that really is, I don't want to say misinformation, but people shouldn't take it seriously.
Well, it's interesting you say that. You know more about it than I do, but here's what you guys have done. You have come on and said, rather than us tell us our opinion about road racing, training, schools, riding technique in my case, let's get a hold of Kerry Andrews, let's get a hold of Bostrom, let's get a hold of Colin, let's Josh Hayes. I mean, most of the time national. Let's find those people to do this. And I really applaud you on that, because there are enough opinions out there, but at some point, at the pointy end, right, where when it all counts, whether it's your own personal lap record, whether it's the last race of a national or a club race or your class race, or it's a downhill corner on a road you've never seen before with your son on the back and it's raining, when it all counts, misinformation kills people, and that's what really hurts. So if I, I listened to your podcast, if you guys would have had a bit of a shit show going and you guys were throwing out all sorts of crazy things, and I'd be like, why would I get on there? But you're not. You're saying, hey, you know what? You do this for a living. You're successful at it. We have very few crashes at our schools. Our instructors are winning. Our graduates are winning, which is the best way to measure it. What are you doing? And that's truly what I would encourage some of these, the YouTube, whatever people, whatever we call them, to do, is get a hold of these professional voices. Because if your voice is going opposite of what the best in the world are doing, you're wrong, and wrong hurts. For instance, this brake gas turn video, it's got like, 750,000 views. Brake, get down with the brake, let go of the brakes, accelerate, extend your forks, make your contact patch in the front smaller, and then turn. Brake gas turn. And everybody, riders, 100% wrong. It is 100% wrong, because when I say wrong, the techniques that we teach have got to work at the pointy end. They've got to work when you pop over the hill and the traffic is completely stopped. They got to work when you pop over the hill and it's gravel. You get down in the corner and it tightens. You get down in the corner and there's a deer standing in your lane. Pick your excuse. Couches in the lane. We've seen it all. You show up at your first track day and it starts to rain and you're on DOT races. You show up at your first track day and the tire guy's not there and you got to run a 6-week-old tire. When it all counts, it has to be right. And that's why I really push what you all are doing. I really push. We've had, I know Yami Noob has been to our school. Mike on Bikes has been to our school, because they realize, you know what? If I'm speaking to the public about motorcycling, I better have the right message. And we believe our message is right. And getting back to a thought I have, if our message is not right, we change our message, because it's got to be best practices.
Yeah. Where do you see this industry in 10 years? I know that Bonnier, they shut down a bunch of magazines. It looks like it's not going to the direction that it should go. Where do you see it? Where do you see it in 10 years?
Well, I never thought about that. That's a really good question. I know Mitch Fame runs AMA magazine, one of the biggest paper magazines out there. I think he's over 200,000 monthly subscribers. So there's still some magazines kicking out there. I know Rider magazine is still rolling, but I do see it going digital. And for all of us who put words and pictures on paper static, I love digital. I love videos. I really do like putting bikes in motion. Getting the message across is a little bit differently done, like these podcasts, but I do enjoy that. So I don't mind it going more digital, because we can put bikes in motion. And then there's still some really strong websites out there. Now, Revzilla with Common Tread is starting out a lot of written stuff, a lot of podcasts. Road Racing World's still very strong on information articles. CycleWorld.com does a really good job with Kevin Cameron and Justin Dawes, some of these guys, Mark Hoyer, good written word. So it may break down to those survival of the fittest, which is way life should be. The best will survive. The poor stuff will be cast aside, and we'll still have an industry. It may not be as big as it was back in the heyday. What do you think? I mean, where do you see it going? That's a good question for you two, because you're probably closer to it than I am.
So we're actually not. We're just fans of the sport, which is why we're doing the podcast. We both have jobs in different industries, right? We're both in software. Actually, Nabil is more in banking now, right, Nabil?
Fintech, yeah.
Fintech.
Yep.
I think the way we see it is that the editors should first of all, it's just way overstaffed, right? The production on anything that the magazine produce it includes all those people that they don't have, that they don't have. I mean, I don't want to say their number on an Excel spreadsheet, but you could maximize the value of your production by maybe outsourcing it or doing other things to make it a little more cost effective. For example, the way we produce this podcast, it was about $400 to start, and then zero money to put it up there, right? But if a magazine does that, how much do you think it's going to cost them? It's going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars because they're going to use a production company. They're not going to do what I do, which is just a Zoom PodTrack P4 with a bunch of $100 microphones, right? And they're not going to use free software to edit it. It's going to cost them a lot of money. So they really need to be conscious of how to do things on a budget, and they need really good SEO and really good understanding on how to push things forward in the digital stage, which includes when to post content, how to post content, when to put a podcast out, when to put a video out, when to put an article out, right? How to, even the smallest things of how to interlink pages on your website have a lot of effect, right? So if you, I mean, there was a time where if you put in a motorcycle name, the only thing that pop up would be asphalt and rubber, right? And the way that guy got his traffic was people just wanted to look at high resolution images, right? So he had good SEO, he had high resolution images, and that was good enough, right? It's not good enough now when everybody has a website, but it was good enough. So really going into the digital age is more complicated than what the current industry leaders think, and they need to bring in the right people to help them make that move. That's what I think.
Okay.
And
have you guys had a chance to look at our Champ U online school yet?
Yeah.
And
do you want an honest opinion?
Yeah, well, off the record, I would love to talk about it.
Okay, off the record, and I'll tell you after we stop the podcast.
Yeah, because our thought was there, Gal, is that our school is expensive. It's time consuming, 2 days plus travel to get there. We aren't close to a lot of people. There's people in Europe that will never get to our school, and so our idea was let's at least start by getting these 4 core champions habits across. Let's get these ideas of radiuses mile an hour, the focus levels necessary, what grip is, and why we're always working on direction. And that's just all that first one was, is get this to these people. And now we're in 121 countries, and it's I think we've had amazing reviews, et cetera, et cetera. It's never going to be a big money maker for us because our overhead is high, but it's a chance for us to say we need to reach more people. And that's what is so thrilling about online stuff, is because this podcast, for instance, it could be passed around for years, right? It's not how many magazines you sell that month. It's the fact that everybody walks around with their magazine and hands it to the next person, and this could be around forever. So that's a big thrill for us to get this Champ U out to people that can't afford it or can't ever get to a school. And it's priced at $50 because we need to change the industry. If straight line braking continues, if people are taught to not ride with the brake cover, not ride with their fingers like this when they're riding, with their fingers out on the brake lever, if riders don't practice proper braking technique, which is a big part of Champ U, is how to get your bike stopped in a true emergency. If those things don't change, we'll just kind of idle along with the sales we have, doing what we're going to do, hoping COVID comes along again and encourages people to get all by themselves in a helmet. Because those of us who know better change things. I bet you heard this from Eric Bostrom and almost everybody you talk to, this idea like, wow, the things that the people in the industry know are not being taught immediately to new riders. And that's really what I'm thrilled about with things like digital media.
I think I was saying before, everybody that gets a new motorcycle there's no manual, they should really get your book, right? Riding techniques, right with the bike. Right, so that's something you can think about. Just distribute it right with the bike.
Yep. Well, now we got Champ U to distribute so much easier. Send you a link and a password, and I mean, I really would love that to happen. Of course, the Champ U was shot on Yamahas, but we started a new company called Factory Motorcycle Training, FMT, Factory Motorcycle Training, because we want to reach as many people as possible. And now we have these OEM companies hiring factory motorcycle training. It is all the Yamaha Champions Riding School instructors, curriculum, ideas, push, programs, everything. But it is no longer Yamaha Champions Riding School that let's say some manufacturer has to hire. Right. And it's because if best practices aren't taught, like for instance, when you pick up a rifle at the Marine Corps, you might, first of all, you're gonna fire that rifle for days without a bullet in it. You're gonna practice that, dry firing it, called snapping in. They say, I'm not a Marine, but I work with them. Then you're gonna start on a 25-meter target, which is super easy to hit, but you will start right away shooting that rifle at 25 meters correctly. Trigger pull, front sight, all the things that they talk about. And then when you graduate up to 800 meter, you are doing the exact same thing you did at 25 meter. And that's all we're saying with best practices and rider coaching. Let's just take something as simple as firing a rifle and do it at a short range and then extend it to the long range with the same practices. So this is what we're pushing so hard. And that's why I'm thrilled about being able to reach people digitally, because, somebody in, where don't we go? Somebody in South Carolina or North Dakota, we will never do a school in their state, but they can get these ideas across to them.
Anybody that thinks your school is expensive never got a hospital bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, or broke down their beautiful motorcycle and spent 15 grand putting it back together.
Yeah.
Even if you don't get hurt. I mean, instead of buying a muffler, right, get the right technique. But you're right. I think digitally is the way to reach the world now, and you guys made it complete and affordable. And frankly, it should be mandatory training with your motorcycle license, because that's the issue. Is everybody gets scared of motorcycles, so you got mothers encouraging their kids not to ride a motorcycle, or straight out forbidding them.
Yeah.
The 600s are already too powerful. Forget about 1,000. So then you get a problem with which bike to buy. Everybody wants to be a hero and buy a Ducati V4 because it looks good, and then they hurt themselves with it, and it's too big for anybody to handle. And the 350s don't look attractive. And so I think there's a whole recalibration in the industry that needs to happen. Like in cars, you need the Halo model that's going to win races and look great. And sure, if you can afford it and you want to ride it to Starbucks, go ahead. But you also need these cool little bikes that made motorcycle riding safe and fun, and just enjoy it. And as a mode of transportation, I mean, it kind of drives me nuts that in the West, where we have fantastic weather all year round, there's not more people on motorcycles and bikes on a daily basis compared to Europe, where the weather sucks 300 days a year. And they're still on their scooters zipping around going to work. So we got our head wrapped around this thing the wrong way, I think, at some point. And that needs to change. And I think it starts with kind of good education, and also showing that the sport can be addressed safely if you get the right education up front.
I'm so with you. I'm 100% with you. I'm not a big mandate fan. I'm not a big fan of the government mandating us onto small bikes first. But I mean, that definitely would help us in a lot of ways. But if you will think about this, the two places where we die the most, and for those out there that are listening, especially veteran riders, may not even realize this, but for the last 5 years in a row, 4,900 riders approximately have died on motorcycles every year in America. So 25,000 riders have been killed on motorcycles in America over the last 5 years, according to the stats that we studied. And the two places are running wide in corners all by yourself. And the second place, it's the most common crash, but the second place, most common way we die, is failure to avoid a car in our path or a vehicle in our path in intersections. And riders, that's unmarked intersections. An unmarked intersection is basically an intersection with no stoplight, no stop sign. And that is cruising down the road with someone's driveway, the 7-Eleven parking lot, unmarked intersections. The car pulls out and we're unable to avoid. And if you just look at it from my point of view, which is riding technique, if you look at new riders are not taught to trail brake. In fact, they're forbidden to trail brake. They only practice their stops from 20 to 25 miles an hour in a parking lot. So, I mean, last time I rode at 25 miles an hour consistently was never. You always pass through 25 up and down. So they aren't practicing their braking, and they're not taught to cover the brakes. In other words, ride with their fingers up, which my father insisted on when I was 12 years old. Ride with your fingers up on the brake lever to cut that reaction time. So you're not trail braking. You've never practiced serious stops before you get your license, and in fact, you're forbidden to cover the brake lever. You've been slapped. Don't cover the brake lever in a lot of these newer schools. You've been taught power through the corner, when in doubt, throttle out, so the bike, of course, runs wide. And you tie those exact things. Okay, no trail braking, bike runs wide. Power out of the corner, bike runs wide. oh, you hit the car in front of you. Oh, you're not covering the brake lever, so you're half a second late. In other words, you're a half a second closer to the emergency by the time you get the brake on. So of course you grab it. At 60 miles an hour, that half second takes 44 feet, which is insane. That's more than halfway through the intersection. And you've never practiced your braking. So the car pulls out, the bus pulls out, and you are late to the brakes, and you've never practiced braking. You don't understand. Load the fork first, and then spread the tire out. That is not part of your understanding. Yet you have a motorcycle license, and in America, thank God, you can buy a GSX-R 1000 the day after you graduate from a new rider school. And I love the freedom of that. But if the coaching and the instruction was better, I would love that more. And we're so into it that we decided to take this huge monetary gamble and create Champ U. And Champ U's second program after this core champions habits will be a new rider school. And we're weeks to months away from having it out. We're working on it nonstop because we're trying to say, if you're motorcycle curious, like you have an idea, like I would like to ride a motorcycle, we want to get this in your hands. And it'll be another very affordable price, get it in your hands and realize this works and this doesn't. Because if you think about, let's say, Ted crashes the motorcycle. So Ted crashes the bike. Everybody who shows up to that crash and drives by that crash, they go home and say, don't ride a motorcycle. The first responders that show up, the police officers and the EMS guys, gals, they say, don't ever ride a motorcycle to all their family and friends. The neighbors say, don't ever ride a motorcycle. Ted's family says, don't ride a motorcycle. So it's just this cascading ball of crap. And everybody's saying, don't ride a bike, when in fact, the motorcycle rider probably did something wrong. There's very few crashes where we are complete victims, like, the meteorite comes down and smashes us. And we're just sitting there in all our gear, perfectly trained, earplugs, all the stuff. Very rarely. It's always something that we do. So our push, our provable push is if the industry could jump in and adapt some of these training best practices, things would change. Things would grow. We would enjoy bikes more, fewer crashes. It would go in the right direction. And I can say it's provable because I've done this since 1997, actually 1995 at Willow. So I've been in this motorcycle training thing forever, and I've watched what happens. I've watched, we go, knock wood, we go school after school with no crashes because this is what we train. We don't worry about the speed, we worry about the control. And I'm telling you, it is just waiting there for someone with the guts to say, this is what we have to do. Let's change things.
Yeah, you're talking government level now.
I guess I am. Come
Well,
on.
I mean, even manufacturers, right?
Say it again.
I'm saying even manufacturers, they could give you a training manual along with your 1,000 bike. It costs them $20, right? On a $25,000 bike, to just give you something that says, like, read this before you start going around fast in corners or riding your bike. And people will. I mean, most people want to learn how to ride correctly. They just don't have access to the info. I mean, I myself started riding because a friend taught me how to ride on a Harley. And as soon as I was able to release the clutch and install the bike, I thought I was a rider. Sure. And I was out there, just going around, and obviously you start going faster. And either you hear some of these myths like brake, accelerate, and turn, or nobody tells you anything, and you're really getting yourself in trouble.
That's exactly right.
There's another aspect, which is drivers' awareness of motorcycles. There was a study made in Germany. I can't remember who did it, but apparently the way our brains learn to not overwork themselves is if you're driving a car, your brain will actually recreate images for you, so you don't have to be constantly registering what's happening. So if you're in front of a long highway, at some point your brain is not reading what your eyes are reading. It's just telling you that everything looks the same as you've seen it 5 seconds before. And the study they've done is as you don't see small objects like motorcycles. And they've done the study where they put a motorcycle or an obstacle and people just don't read it. They don't register, it doesn't show up in their brain, and they just hit you on a stop sign or go through it. And so I love when I see campaigns on billboards and so on that says, pay attention to motorcycles, look twice, save lives. I think we need a lot more of that too. But the less motorcycles you have, the less that becomes relevant and the less it's done. It's a bit of a vicious cycle.
It is. I've read those studies as well, and of course thought about them. And one of the things that I think veteran riders do so well is to move through traffic. We move through traffic, and it's tough because there are speed limits, but we don't move through traffic with 40 miles an hour in hand. We move through traffic. We trickle through traffic. We're always a little bit quicker than traffic. And the thinking is, we are as we move through traffic on the street, we are making judgments on the cars ahead of us, as opposed to sitting at static speed in traffic and letting other drivers make judgments on us and hopefully see us. So this is a big part of it, and it can be misinterpreted. You can get pulled over by the sheriff and say, "Oh, Nick Ienatsch said I should be faster than all the traffic." Well, I am actually saying that, but we trickle through traffic. We're always a little bit quicker than the traffic, and we place ourselves to not be hit if things go wrong. And it's quite a science. In fact, we have a Champ U program going about it, because I've never heard it done correctly, and I call it the logically paranoid rider, because paranoid means, and you've heard this before, everybody's out to kill you, when in fact they're not. They're just very poor drivers. There might be a few truly incidents where the driver is deranged and etc. But generally speaking, they're just very poor drivers. They've got no training, no focus, no concentration, no ability to steer the bike very well or car very well. So they're not trying to kill you, but you can pretend like they are and be logical about that. And you can make logical decisions on the type of car, the number of bumps and bruises on the car, the way the driver's driving, the traffic's going on. So all these progressions are made by the veteran riders, and you're nodding your head because you do it. And you do it because as you paid attention and watched and learned, you saw the patterns established. So what we're trying to do for these newer riders is to shortcut that learning curve. And we're gonna do a Champ U on it, because I feel so strongly about it. I love riding motorcycles. I love commuting on motorcycles. I would ride a motorcycle before most cars any day of the week, but I got to get there. I got to be safe doing it. And so we're going to be pushing hard for that.
I'm also happy to see that new cars have those flashing lights on their mirrors.
I am too. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're not going to bump into you if their mirror is saying, "Hey, there's a motorcycle there."
Yeah, they might interrupt their texting. All these nannies, all these stay in your lane. Have you rented the new car, or do you have a new car? I mean, we rent these new minivans for the school, and they got stay in your lane departure. They've got brake. They automatically brake. We've almost crashed 2 minivans with automatic braking, because they brake when they feel like you're in imminent danger, when in fact the car ahead of you is turning and you're approaching it, and they throw the brakes on, and it's been pretty crazy. So all these nannies are because people are poorly trained. They're poorly trained. They're poorly focused. You're allowed to have your cell phone on in the car. You're allowed to talk on it, text on it, even though it's illegal. So none of this stuff is brain science or brain surgery. And if any of these politicians would listen to us doing it, the people in the street, we could solve all this stuff. Cell phone does not work in the car except for 911. That's a rule. You've got to go through significant training to get a license. You've got to, I mean, just so many things right down the line that we could design into American travel, but that probably won't happen. So we as riders need to be head on a swivel, totally paranoid, moving through traffic, staying out of people's ways, and make sure, I liken it to making sure you cannot be hit as much as you possibly can, that you literally cannot be reached. And that means following a car through an intersection closely, hiding in their shade, whatever it takes to get. Never hope the driver won't hit you. Just never be there when they make the mistake.
And don't think you're on a racetrack. I mean, just because on Sunday you want to rear race, it doesn't matter on the street. You're going to ride the way you need to ride on the street. That has no bearings on your track riding.
Not at all. If you think about it, riders, the person who goes the fastest in the canyons could very well be the person who cares the least. If you do not care what's around the corner, you don't care what's over the rise, you just do not care, you can drag your knee on the street. But there's a very famous 250 national champion killed on the street in San Diego riding too fast. And if any of you are with a group that wants to drag their knee on the street, you're going to meet that group's family in the hospital or the morgue. Guaranteed. You just cannot ride at the limit. And you don't have to listen to me. I'm some old guy preaching to you. You don't know who I am. Who's this old guy? But I'll tell you what, if you leave that safety margin on the street, ride with your friends, not against your friends, and come to the racetrack. For $250, you can get on the racetrack and let it all go. And you'll see what speed is all about. And I think every one of us, once we started at the racetrack, we realized, wow, the street is to ride with my friends, to lunch together and have the time of our lives on bikes with that margin. In other words, 30% margin in the amount of RPM you use and throttle, 30% margin on an amount of brake use that's still left over, and most importantly, 30% margin in lean angle. That you have that ability to lean the bike in further safely on tires because you're not screaming into the corner at the limit. And you can listen to this and do it and have the time of your lives, or just go ahead and keep trying to drag your knee on the street and be hurt badly.
100%.
Yeah. I have a very short question now that has a very long answer. I'm conscious of the time, but not too much. I heard your partner Ken Hill, right? Ken Hill.
Yeah.
He has his own podcast that I listen to. A very, very good podcast. I suggest everybody go and listen to that podcast as well. He was talking about his top 10 favorite motorcycles. Do you have a top 10?
Man, well, Judy, my wife, accuses me of loving every motorcycle I've ever ridden, and I do. I mean, they're so good. It's hard to find a bad motorcycle these days. I'm not a fan of the cruisers. I'm not a fan of a bike that won't lean over significantly. I don't want to be limited by the bike. And I don't want to run down into a downhill corner I've never seen before and not have lean angle to make it. And I don't know what that lean angle number is, but I'd like to bike that leans over to 50 degrees, I think, fair to say, just in case I'm in too fast. So that puts the cruisers toward the back of my list. But if you buy a cruiser, be aware of that and stuff like that. But I'm just not a huge fan of the riding position. But among my favorites, top 10, I was extremely blessed back in the day. I've ridden MotoGP bikes. I rode Alex Barros's MotoGP bike. I've ridden Grand Prix bikes, Eddie Lawson's 500, Wayne Rainey's 500, Mick Doohan's 500 at Suzuka, Matt Mladen's 1000 or Mladen's 750 Superbike. I rode Rich Oliver's. I rode all the #1 bikes, Super Sport 750 Super. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I've been on some really amazing bikes, but probably outstanding to me was Kenny Robert Jr.'s 500 at Phillip Island. He won the championship in 2000, and in 2000 I was younger, and I was racing, and I was pretty tuned up. I was pretty after it, trying pretty hard. And I remember training to go to Phillip Island to ride his 500, and I showed up there to not ride around like a journalist and go, oh gosh, it's so neat. I went there to try to really ride the bike to the best of my abilities, which were quite a bit slower than Junior rode it. But that would probably be right up there with my favorite bike. No nannies in 2000, the thing just incredible. And before I got on the bike, I was told by Warren Willing, the crew chief, he said, Nick, don't think you're not doing a great job just because you're not using a lot of throttle. And that is such a good thing to hear for people who run on these thousands. And Nabil, that's such a good thing to remember when you get your 1,000 back. It's such a good thing to remember that little bits of throttle on most bikes make big differences. So that was really good. So 500, and then I got to ride the Britain and race the Britain. Jim Hunter had a Britain, and he let me ride it at Daytona first, just for some parade laps, and then he let me race it, and I did well on it. In fact, I was leading the unlimited whatever CCS deal. Arion Racing was there, Dutchman, all those people were there. I was leading all those people, Barney and all those guys, on the Britain, and then the steering stabilizer broke loose and locked on the pipe and locked my steering, and I fell over in the chicane. But until then, I was beating all those people. That's what done Britain. And then this Spondon TZ750 I've ridden and raced. That's a big thing. TZ250 is up in there.
The picture that I saw in Daytona, you were leading the Britain. You were on a Bimota Tesi.
Yeah, Bimota Tesi. Yeah, but Andrew Stroud was on the Britain, and he was just playing with me. So he was really fast on the Britain, and I had the Tessie, and we had the two best bikes in the class. So we jumped out to the lead, and he kind of just rode around with me, I felt, and then he won the race. But yeah, that was a Tessie that was built for me. It was pretty cool. So as I think about stuff, I mean, my buddy Brian Smith has built a really badass Paul Smart replica that he's won in Arma. That's been a neat bike for me. So, it's a long list. Let's just say that. And someday I probably should write down some of those ideas, because it's been a very blessed life, the things I got to ride. Because back in the day, man, they would let journalists show up and ride the stuff, and I took full advantage of it. I was very, very lucky.
Yeah. I think well, this is a long episode. Do you have any more questions, Nabil?
I think we've tapped out. You've been very generous with your time, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, break it up into two pieces or edit all the bull crap I said out of there and make it shorter. But it means a lot to me too, because we're going to post this on our site as well. And if you think about the way the sport has to be, individual. You can't really yell out a couple of little riding techniques and hope it works, because if it's not in context, it's tough. And that's why these longer podcasts sometimes have to be. If you don't understand that the tire has to be loaded before you brake or accelerate, or even steering has to be initially gentle to load the tire. If you don't understand that, you'll never realize why people could trail brake, right? You would never think that. You would never realize why people can get mid-corner and pick up brake pressure, because you don't realize how smoothly the initial has to be. And so we say initial brakes or throttle have to be for weight transfer only. And if you just think about my initial brake initiation will be to transfer weight forward, the initial throttle will be like, but if you never hear those ideas, then trail braking sounds crazy and braking mid-corner sounds crazy. And some of these new rider schools, when we say, hey, we need to teach trail braking, they'll say, oh gosh, you're crazy. We can't fit that into our curriculum. We're saying we got to start the curriculum differently. We've got to evolve the curriculum to start so that trail braking can be automatically understood through tire loading, 100% of grip, 100 points of grip, radius equals miles an hour, dropping, radius tightening. All those things have to be in there. And if we can't put it in context, if we try to do a 3-minute Nick Ienatsch tip, somebody would write in and go, he's crazy. When I grab the brakes at lean angle, I fall down. Well, you use the wrong verb. You use grab. So to put it all in context means a little bit, and tighten it up and break it into two. I bet nobody's listening at this point. It's about an hour and almost 2 hours into it. So everybody's all
they're listening, but if this episode is out on a Monday, this is probably Wednesday.
Yeah, right.
Because they already got home, got to work.
Yeah.
But listening to it is one thing, and experiencing it and learning it correctly with the instructor that is actually talking to you right now is a different story. So they do need to come to your school, and they do need to experience that theory, right? Because you're talking, it's a theory. It's like them, right now it's like them reading a book, right? I mean, we're pretty much book on tape for them right now. But you still need to experience that theory, and you still need to make it body memory. Otherwise, it's never going to work.
Yep, and that's why we film everybody at our school each day, because once you see yourself in film, and we get a chance to work through the film with you, it's really different. And that gets back to that individual coaching. You're hearing these things, and they will help you. And you two are putting them into play. Like, okay, I can see turn 2, da da da. But when you get coached by someone you trust, that's what really matters. And that's a big part of our school. And there was an article done just came out on Leah Edit, and the author said that it's a bunch of Tony Robbins type of communicators speaking to you. And I took that as quite a compliment. In other words, the kids that are going to teach you, and I mean kids, there's some 22-year-olds. I think Chris Paris is our older instructor besides me and Mark Schellinger. Nick Mathern's a little bit older, but Chris is only 37. So it's a bunch of young people, but they are truly into this. I mean, they really understand that if they can help you ride better, you will not just grow the motorcycle industry, but you'll talk about the school and get people there. And we're sold out. I mean, we're sold out with waiting lists, which is a wonderful place to be because of the instructors. And so, and we've got a set of core instructors: Isaiah Davis, Michael Haynow, Kyle Wyman, Cody Wyman, Ryan Burke, Chris Paris, Nick Ienatsch, Nick Mathern. Now, those guys will be there, and they are really, really focused on helping you ride better, because you have to have it individual. It has to be, hey, right here, your head drops too late. That's why your bike's running wide. And that's what the school does. But I know we didn't, this is not a sales pitch, right? This is not a sales pitch. This is like, if we who understand this sport, if we don't speak up and push on people to improve, it won't. Right. And it's not a huge revolution. It's an evolution. We need to evolve into these ideas, because the bike is designed not by a beginning rider, but by an expert rider. So if you'll realize that the bike is designed by an expert rider, so the expert rider's inputs have to be taught immediately, or the bike will not work as designed. So now the bike runs wide because the rider's been taught to get off the brakes before they steer. Bike's not designed for that. It's not designed to steer in the corner with the fork rebounding and the contact patch getting smaller. So if we can all just be open-minded and decide, you know what, it's time to evolve, let's tweak on this, let's keep messing with it, we could have it done And it'd be a whole new world in America if we can push all coaches and instructors toward these ideas. And everybody, they are not Nick Ienatsch's ideas. I can explain them, I can do them, but it is the way the bike's designed to be ridden. And for proof on that, pick up Kenny Roberts' book. Was probably written in the mid 80s, 84, 85, I don't know. And Kenny Roberts said, if you let go of the brakes before the bike, if you let go of the brakes before the corner, the bike, how did he put it? The bike lifts up and wants to run wide. In other words, you let go of the brakes, the fork rebounds, the bike raises and runs wide. It was written with a British author, so the wording was a little bit weird. But in other words, Kenny Roberts was saying back in the mid 80s, everybody leave the brake on past the tip in because the bike's designed to steer that way. So those are the way I want to push it, because it's easy to throw stones and say, hey, you guys are all doing something wrong. We got to get it right. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the majority of what's being taught to new riders is very good. We just need to tweak that 5%, because as we go quicker and quicker, that 5% gets larger and larger.
Yeah, true words.
Absolutely. Well, great. I think we should do another one just on street riding, because we've covered kind of the advanced level, but there's so much to talk about with like defensive riding on the street, which you've touched upon a little bit, Nick. That also I've done some readings and courses about it, and there's tons of things people can do on the street to be safe too.
You're lucky to be able,
but that's yeah.
You're lucky to be able to still live in the valley, because here in Vegas, first of all, there's no filtering law, so you have to ride like a car, which makes no sense. And it's also super hot, so I do take my truck out to work, not a motorcycle. But it's I mean, I lived in the valley for 20 years, and yeah, I did ride on the street. I commuted on the 405, and it was fun because it took an hour out of my commuting.
Yep, and I lived in San Fernando Valley and then La Crescenta, and commuted into Hollywood every day. And I had a boss named Art Friedman. You remember Art Friedman? Road racer as well, but he was such a traffic survivalist. He really got us all thinking about traffic survival. And in the 11 years I was at the magazines, I think we only had one traffic accident, one accident where a car and a bike, one of our bikes got together, and there were 6 of us riding every day into work. So there's a huge story there. I'd love to participate if I could. And I know we'll wrap this up, but I wanted to tell you two, thanks for doing this. And you're coming from a enthusiastic viewpoint, and that's what really changes things. When you are an enthusiast, when you truly love riding, you truly want to grow the sport, you want to never crash again, yet you want to run a good pace, you want to get to breakfast with the lead group, having the time of your lives with a 30% margin. When those what push you, it changes everything. If you're running a school to get students through as quick as you can to sell bikes, or running a school and packing as many students as you can to make money, that's when things go sideways. And that's what I see. When you are saying, you know what, I want this sport to get better. This is my passion and my love, and I'm going to put on a podcast or run a school, whatever you're going to do. That's what changes things. So I really appreciate you two coming from that viewpoint.
We appreciate you coming on. I mean, we're just two amateurs. They're just fans of the sport, and we ask people that we want to talk to come on the podcast because we truly want to talk to them. So we're not going to have anybody on the podcast that we don't think is going to, we don't personally don't want to talk to them, or we don't think they're going to bring any value, right? So everybody that's here, I think we're trying to leave something behind, and I think what you left us and everybody that's listening today is just, I mean, it's unbelievable information. So thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. It's quite good company. I mean, Josh Hayes and those guys they're my heroes too, and I think that's a big thing. And I tell you what, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've asked people like Josh Hayes, Chris Paris, Freddie Spencer. I always say, is what you're doing what we're teaching, and that is such a big thing. And the thought with that, for everybody who says, oh gosh, these guys, Nick's talking about racing. Everybody, the only measurable part of our sport is racing. It's got lap times, finishing positions, number of crashes, championship points. It's the only measurable thing. And does the motorcycle know if it's on a racetrack, a back road, or a parking lot? It has no idea. Do the tires know? They have no idea. So good riding works on the racetrack, and it'll make you an incredible street rider. Bad riding hurts on the racetrack. You lose points, lose championship, hurt yourself, and will kill you on the street. So this is that's the push with this. We've got to go back to the racetrack, because if you say, oh, my uncle, he taught me to use just the rear brake, and my uncle's been riding for 40 years. Well, your uncle only rides on 75-degree days or warmer. He rides 6 miles down to the cafe on roads he knows, and he's had his bike for 12 years. Well, yeah, he can just use the rear brake because there's no measurable changes in what he does. So that's why the racetrack comes into play. And that's a big part of it, because people will say, oh, these guys are teaching trail braking because it's a racetrack technique. Everybody, the bike doesn't know if it's turn 5 at Elkhart Lake, downhill, second gear, or your favorite canyon left-hand corner. The bike doesn't know. It works or it doesn't work based on the best techniques, and that's all we're chasing.
It's an excellent point.
All right. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nabil. And and we certainly need an episode 2. I have so many more questions about your life and about all your experiences and all the races you won. Questions we didn't get to. But
I think people tune in to be helped, and I think that, and it's why we get down to business at our school. We start in the parking lot. We start with a tire. We start with a bike, and we get right to it, because. And I think at some point you're like, okay, blah, blah, blah. What do I got to do? And that's the way I feel about it. And, talking about yourself, of course, is my favorite subject. But I think in these cases, we need to get to it. And so thanks for letting me.
It's also, it's also the human story, right? So people want to know who's teaching them, right? And now they know.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Let's finish the episode now. And it's a long episode, but I hope you're still listening, which I'm sure you are. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Nick. Take care.
Thank you, Nabil.